Welcome back to The Curious Case, where stories brew slow and secrets cool even slower. I'm your host, Harry, and tonight we're stepping into a tale that starts with T and ends with a tune no one dares to play twice. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? A quiet corner, a city window, or somewhere the rain hasn't stopped yet? I read every single one. Now settle in, because sometimes even music can lie. Let's begin. The evening train slowed near the edge of Surrey. Mist drifted over fields. Greybrook Hall rose beyond them, quiet and cold. Miss Marple stepped down with her small suitcase, greeted by a polite driver. "A short ride, ma'am," he said. She smiled. "Let's hope the concert begins on time." The manor was vast, its windows glowing against the pale dusk. Inside, laughter echoed too brightly, as though rehearsed. Lady Iris Willoughby stood at the entrance, tall, poised, perfectly polite. Her husband, the late Sir Henry, had been a famous composer. Tonight's charity concert was meant to honor him. The guests gathered. Colonel Graves, loud and red-faced. Dr. Venn, courteous but cold. Young pianist Clara Wills, her hands trembling before every note. Dinner began with polite conversation. Silver glinted, candles flickered. Every word seemed practiced, every smile tight. Then it happened. The grand piano in the corner, untouched, struck a single key. Low, prolonged. The sound froze the room. Clara gasped. Dr. Venn looked sharply toward the stage. No one moved. Lady Iris rose slowly. Her face had lost all color. "It's the new piano," she whispered. "It only plays when he's near." A few laughed uneasily, but the sound didn't last. Miss Marple watched the widow's hands. They trembled as if she'd heard this sound before. The silence deepened. Only the clock ticked. Then a second note, higher this time. A chord followed. 3, 4, 5. The melody formed faint, deliberate, and terribly familiar to Lady Iris. She pressed a hand to her chest. Clara whispered, "That's his piece, his unfinished one." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The air had changed heavy, waiting. Lady Iris turned to the guests, her voice thin. "I had it tuned yesterday. No one has touched it since." The pianist stepped closer, pale as porcelain. "Then who's playing now?" she whispered. A single high note answered her, sharp, perfect, final. Every head turned. No one sat at the keys. The last vibration faded into the ceiling beams. Somewhere in the hallway, a door creaked. Lady Iris stared at the instrument, whispering to no one at all. "He's come back for his song." And then the piano began again, louder, faster, alive. The clock struck 12. A long, hollow sound rolled through the corridor. Miss Marple woke instantly. Old habits, light sleeper, sharp ears. At first, she thought it was wind. Then she heard it again. Music. Faint. Broken. The same melody from dinner, but slower, wrong. She slipped on her shawl and stepped into the dark passage. The lights were dim. The house breathed with soft creaks. Each note of the piano echoed from below. She followed, down one stair, then another, each step colder than the last. The tune stopped. A silence thick as fog filled the hall. Miss Marple waited, hand on the banister. Then one more sound. A single wrong note, held too long. It trembled like air before thunder. She reached the study door. It was slightly open. A lamp still burned inside, weak and yellow. The pianist, Clara Wills, sat slumped across the desk. Her head rested on scattered sheets of music. Ink still wet. A cup lay tipped beside her arm. Brandy, maybe, or something else. Miss Marple did not scream. She rarely did. Instead she looked. One glance told her the truth. No fall, no accident. The stillness was too neat. She moved. Closer. The girl's fingers were stiff, one still curved as if pressing a key. The piano stood behind her, lid open. Strings glimmered faintly. A breeze passed soft enough to stir a few keys. They moved. 3 gentle notes. Miss Marple whispered, "Someone's still playing." She turned toward the window. Closed. Curtains drawn tight. No footprints on the carpet. No sign of entry. She looked again at the sheet music. One page torn, one missing. On the last line, a phrase written in hurried strokes, "For him unfinished." Her gaze shifted to the mantel clock. Stopped at 11:47. Yet she'd heard music at midnight. She lifted the brandy glass. The smell bit sharp. Almond. Cyanide. Unmistakable. The lid of the piano creaked again. She froze. Keys moved faint, random. Not wind, not vibration. Each sound timed. Precise. Miss Marple crouched, examining the pedals. Something clicked underneath. A slow rhythm, steady, relentless. Not part of the mechanism, not part of the song. She touched the underside, felt warmth, heard ticking. A small round pulse, a metronome, but not made of wood and brass. It hummed faintly electric, hidden beneath the soundboard. Her lips pressed thin. "Clever," she murmured. "Very clever." Behind her the corridor light flickered once, footsteps above, a door shutting softly. She turned, waiting, but saw only her own shadow across the rug. The ticking continued. Not steady now, faster, uneven, almost alive. Miss Marple closed the lid of the piano with slow care. The ticking didn't stop. It grew louder. From deep inside the instrument, she leaned close. "Not mechanical," she whispered. "Not at all." Then the ticking stopped. The lamp flickered, and in the silence, a single perfect note rang out, low, final, dead. Morning came grey and cold. The rain had stopped, but the silence in Greybrook Hall hadn't. Inspector Hart arrived, just after 7, a broad man, suspicious of everything that wore lace. Miss Marple met him in the hall with her calm nod. "The pianist," she said softly, "was poisoned." He grunted. "You're certain?" "Quite." Her eyes moved to the half-empty glass still on the tray. No scent of liquor could hide that bitterness. The guests gathered in the drawing-room, faces pale, manners brittle. One by one, the masks began to slip. Lady Iris sat near the window. Perfect posture, perfect silence. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring over and over. When Inspector Hart asked where she'd been at midnight, she said, "Asleep." Too quickly, too firmly. Her voice cracked on the last word. Dr. Venn leaned against the mantel, hands folded, old friend of her late husband. Spoke like a man performing civility. "We were discussing the charity program," he said. "Clara stayed after rehearsal to arrange the scores." He paused. "And to complain." "About what?" Miss Marple asked. "Credit," he said. "Or lack of it." Clara's assistant, young, nervous, avoided everyone's eyes. She kept rubbing her wrists, red from scrubbing. "I didn't touch her things," she whispered. "Not after dinner, I swear." But Miss Marple noticed something else. Faint grey dust under her nails. Piano graphite. The kind used to mark tempo lines. Then came Colonel Graves, loud voice. Louder cane. He banged it once against the floor. "Superstitious nonsense," he said. "Pianos don't kill people." Miss Marple tilted her head. "No," she said quietly. "People do." The room fell still. Rain tapped faintly on the glass. The old clock struck 9. Each sound landed like a question no one wished to answer. Inspector Hart began collecting statements. Miss Marple watched instead. Patterns, hands, eyes, small movements that said more than words. Lady Iris flinched every time the piano was mentioned. Dr. Venn avoided looking at her altogether. Clara Wills sat shaking, muttering. It was his piece, his piece. Colonel Graves tapped his cane in rhythm, a harsh, impatient tempo. Miss Marple drifted to the piano. The keys were still cold, the sheet music still on the stand. She studied the top page, Requiem for a Marriage. Her fingers hovered over the notes. Fingerprints. Several. Some old, smudged. One fresh, pressed along the edge of the margin, the tempo line. She leaned closer. The last marking wasn't part of the original manuscript. Someone had written a new tempo above the staff. A change, a faster beat. She touched the corner lightly. The ink smeared under her fingertip. Still wet. She turned slowly toward the silent group. "Someone," she said, "has been composing after death." Lady Iris looked up sharply. Dr. Ven's jaw tightened. Clara gasped. Colonel Graves stopped tapping his cane. And somewhere deep in the house the piano answered with one soft note. Just one, as if agreeing. The afternoon dragged slow. Greybrook Hall felt heavier than before. No one played music now. Even the piano seemed to hold its breath. Miss Marple sat in the breakfast room with her knitting untouched. Outside, clouds were gathering again, dark, uneven, restless. The housekeeper brought tea, hands shaking. "The maid's asking to see you, ma'am," she whispered. "Elsie. She says she remembers something." Elsie stood by the doorway, pale and nervous. Her apron wrinkled, eyes rimmed red. Miss Marple smiled gently. "You can speak freely, my dear. We're only two women talking." Elsie nodded, swallowed hard. "It was before the concert," she said. "Lady Iris was in her room, crying. I heard her. Her voice trembled. She kept saying the same thing over and over, something about forgiveness." "Forgiveness?" Miss Marple repeated softly. Elsie nodded again, and then she said, "He'll never forgive me. Not after what I've done." Miss Marple folded her hands. "What time was this?" "Just before the guests arrived. I was lighting the hallway lamps." "You told no one?" Elsie's voice shrank. "I thought it wasn't my place. But now—" Her breath caught. She was burning something in the fireplace. Paper. A letter, I think. Miss Marple rose at once. "Show me." They crossed to the west corridor, quiet as ghosts. The air smelled faintly of smoke and polish. Lady Iris's writing room stood empty, untouched since morning. Inside, Miss Marple knelt by the small fireplace. Cold ash, charred corners of stationery. She brushed gently until a few blackened pieces came free. Half a page still legible. One phrase escaped the fire. "You stole my symphony." Miss Marple studied the handwriting. Well, not Iris's, the strokes were heavier, firmer. A man's hand. The paper's edge bore the faint mark of music ink, dark grey, oily. She straightened slowly. "Tell me, Elsie. Did anyone deliver a letter that afternoon?" Elsie hesitated. "Dr. Ven, ma'am. He came by early. Said he had a program change for the concert. And he handed it to her directly." "Yes, ma'am." And she went pale right after reading it. Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills. The first drops hit the windows fast, sharp, insistent. Elsie twisted her hands. "I shouldn't have kept it quiet. It's bad luck, all this. The music, the deaths." Miss Marple laid a hand on her arm. "Truth, my dear, is never bad luck. It only sounds that way when it's late." A flash of lightning split the sky. Thunder followed close behind, louder this time. Then came another sound, a scream, high, sudden, tearing through the west wing. Elsie froze. Miss Marple turned toward the hall. "Stay here," she said. The storm outside roared, shaking the windows. From somewhere upstairs, footsteps ran. Fast, uneven, and then silence. The kind of silence that waits for the next note. The storm broke after midnight. Wind clawed at the windows. Thunder rolled like cannon fire across the fields. By morning, Greybrook Hall was drenched and silent again. But peace didn't return. It never does after murder. Miss Marple stood near the library door when the scream came. A man's voice this time. Colonel Graves shouting for help. They rushed in. Dr. Ven sat upright in an armchair, eyes open but lifeless. A glass of sherry beside him, half full. His lips were blue. The bottle on the tray stood untouched except for that one pour. Inspector Hart arrived moments later, coat dripping, temper already sharp. "Another one?" he barked. Lady Iris nodded faintly. Her hands trembled as she clutched the back of a chair. I sent for him this morning," she whispered, "to discuss the concert's future." Miss Marple looked at the glass. No rim mark. Clean pour. Then her eyes moved to the piano upstairs. A sound drifted faintly through the ceiling. A single note, long and low. The same one that had played the night before. Inspector Hart scowled. "What's that?" "The piano," Miss Marple said quietly, though no one's near it. He snorted. "Ghost stories. Nothing more. Likely a draft in the wires." "Perhaps," she murmured. But drafts rarely play the same note twice. The inspector ignored her and examined the body. "Poison again," he muttered. "Smell that? Almond. Same as before." Miss Marple nodded. "But Dr. Venn didn't drink last night. He refused the brandy. He said it upset his heart. So why drink sherry now?" She smiled faintly. "Because someone offered it to him. As comfort." Lady Iris swayed slightly, gripping the chair tighter. Colonel Graves crossed his arms. "I told him this cursed house would finish us all," he growled. Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward Lady Iris's wrists. A faint smudge of brown residue from fireplace ash, the same kind that marked the half-burned letter. She said nothing. Not yet. The inspector ordered the constable to seal the library and search for any trace of entry. There was none. Every window latched, every door locked. And still, that single piano note lingered, unbroken, unexplained. Miss Marple moved closer to the hearth. The rug there was thick, worn from years of tread. Yet, something beneath it caught her eye, a tiny shift, a faint lift under the corner. She pressed her foot lightly. The wood gave way just enough to creak. She bent down, listened. A sound answered her. Not wind, not water. A faint mechanical pulse. Tick, tick, tick. She froze, leaning closer. It came from beneath the floorboards, steady and deliberate. Lady Iris saw her pause. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thin. Miss Marple straightened slowly. "Something," she said, "that wishes to be heard." The inspector frowned. "A clock?" Miss Marple shook her head. "No, something pretending to be one." The ticking continued. Slow, precise, alive. The afternoon light fell weak across the drawing room. No one spoke above a whisper now. Every sound in Greybrook Hall felt watched. Inspector Hart searched the library again. Miss Marple lingered near the piano. The instrument sat open, silent, its keys faintly dusted with ash from the storm-damp air. She touched one. It answered with a hollow echo like a throat half-closed. Something about the piano unsettled her, too clean beneath the lid, too disturbed inside the bench. She lifted the seat slowly. Beneath the cushion lay a sealed folder, tied with black ribbon. Old paper, embossed initials, H.W. She carried it to the light. The first page read, "Requiem for a Marriage." Sir Henry Willoughby's name stood at the top, but at the bottom, another signature. Different ink, different hand. A. Woman's. Iris Willoughby. She turned the pages carefully. Half written in one hand, the rest in another. Two composers weaving through the same melody. Two tempers inside one song. Miss Marple frowned. Some lines were angry, sharp key changes, violent tempo shifts. Not harmony. Argument. A musical quarrel. She ran a finger along the margin. Tiny pencil marks. Notes circled. A message coded in rhythm. At the last page, one line stood out, a repeat marked, "For the living, not the dead." She closed the folder softly. Voices sounded behind her. Lady Iris entered with the inspector. Her step light, but careful, like walking through memory. The inspector eyed the folder. "What have you found there?" Miss Marple didn't answer at once. She looked at Lady Iris. "Did you compose, madam?" A flicker, almost fear, crossed the widow's face. "My husband taught me. Once." Miss Marple held up the score. "It seems he taught you well." Lady Iris hesitated. Her hands twitched, wanting to take the folder, then stopping midway. "He never meant anyone to see that," she said quietly. Her eyes were fixed on the tied ribbon. "Not after what happened." Inspector Hart snorted. "Domestic secrets, that's all. Let's not turn a tune into a clue." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Music, Inspector, is simply emotion wearing order. It records what speech dares not." She opened the last page again. The double signature glimmered faintly in the weak light. Henry's line below Iris's. Her hand smaller, tighter, overlapping his. Possession or defiance. Miss Marple asked softly, "When was this piece finished?" Lady Iris's voice broke on the answer. "The week before he died." The room seemed to shrink. Even Inspector Hart fell quiet. Miss Marple placed the score back on the piano, her voice gentle. "2 names on 1 requiem. That's not a dedication, that's a confession." Lady Iris stared at the sheet, eyes unfocused, seeing something the others could not. Her hand trembled as she whispered, "He never forgave me for finishing it." A single low note sounded from the piano, unplayed, but real. Rain returned before evening. Soft at first, then steady, like fingers drumming on glass. Miss Marple sat at the writing table near the fire. The folder lay open before her. 2 hands, 2 tempers, 1 tragedy. She studied the pages slowly, without sound. Sir Henry's handwriting flowed broad, confident, elegant. Lady Iris's was tighter, sharper, quick to cut and close. But something else caught her eye, a third rhythm, the notations. Precise, professional. Musician's shorthand, not Iris's, not Henry's. She had seen that same pattern on another page. She rose, crossed to the piano, and pulled a sheet from the pile of Clara Wills's work. Same spacing, same markings, the murdered pianist's hand. Miss Marple's lips thinned. Clara hadn't just played Sir Henry's music. She had been finishing it, completing a piece neither husband nor wife ever closed. She turned another page and froze. In the corner of one score, faint pencil initials. V.D. Dr. Venn. She remembered his words at dinner. We were all part of Henry's genius. Yes, part of it and profiting from it. She moved to the bookshelf. A dusty spine caught her attention. Collected Studies in Harmonic Innovation by Dr. Malcolm Venn. Inside, the dedication page bore a familiar title. Requiem for a Marriage. Published 5 years earlier, before Sir Henry's death, before the concert, before the so-called haunting. Miss Marple closed the book quietly. Her thoughts settled into order. Dr. Venn had stolen the work. Lady Iris had discovered it. The pianist, Clara, had been helping restore the original. And someone fearing exposure had silenced them all. Betrayal, jealousy, theft, pride, every motive in perfect counterpoint. But one question remained. Who killed first? If Iris poisoned Clara, why leave the glass so neat? If Venn killed Clara, who poisoned him after? And if neither had time? She stopped. A faint sound interrupted her thoughts. A hinge creak, then a soft click. She turned. The drawing-room door had moved. By itself, then closed. A sharp metallic snap followed. The latch fell into place, locked from the outside. Miss Marple rose slowly. "Inspector?" she called. No answer. Only rain. The windows rattled once, then went still. She tested the handle. It refused. The fireplace crackled louder, or was it footsteps beyond the wall? A shadow passed under the door, faint, deliberate. Then silence again. She looked at the folder on the table. Its pages stirred slightly, as if touched by a draught. The top one fluttered open, revealing a final, unfinished line in Sir Henry's hand. "Forgive nothing." Miss Marple stood very still, her voice low. Someone's rewriting history. The fire hissed softly. Then, somewhere in the hall, a piano key struck once slow and mocking. The locked door didn't move. The rain eased by dusk, but Greybrook Hall did not rest. Servants whispered. Doors creaked without reason. Inspector Hart prowled the corridors, heavy-footed and impatient. Miss Marple remained near the piano, quiet as thought itself. She watched it the way others watched a confession. Still, shining, innocent on the outside. But secrets rarely stay silent for long. She waited until the house grew calm. Then, with one small lamp for light, she began her inspection. The lid lifted easily. The strings gleamed under the yellow glow. Nothing strange there at first glance. But when she pressed a single key, she heard something new, a faint metallic vibration beneath the note. Not string, not wood, metal. She leaned closer. Between the tuning pins, thin copper wires, barely visible. Too new for an old piano. They led down through the frame, looping behind the pedals. Someone had modified the instrument recently, and carefully. She traced the wires with her fingers. They disappeared into the soundboard. A hollow echo answered every touch. Somewhere inside, something ticked. Miss Marple knelt and reached beneath the keyboard. Her hand brushed a hidden panel thin, covered in black velvet to match the frame. It shifted with a soft click. Behind it lay a small brass box, the size of a watch. She lifted it out slowly. Inside a timepiece, precise and humming. But not just a clock. It was wired directly into a lever that connected to the piano's hammer mechanism. Each turn of the minute hand released a spring, striking a note. The piano could play itself. She sat back, eyes narrowing. So, not a haunting, a performance, a planned illusion, built to frighten and distract. But for what? To mask poison? To unsettle a guilty conscience? Or to send a message only one person could understand? The ticking grew louder. She turned the clock over. A dial etched on the back showed Mark's hours scratched roughly by hand. The next marking stood at 12. Midnight. Miss Marple froze. The mechanism was still running, set to strike again. She checked the second hand. It moved clean, steady, alive. No corrosion, no dust. Someone had wound it recently, within hours. She replaced the clock into its hidden cavity and lowered the panel. Her hands didn't tremble, but her breath did. The melody wasn't haunting the house. It was warning it. She stood, adjusting the lamp. The long room stretched into darkness. Each step toward the door echoed like part of a countdown. Behind her, one faint tick skipped. Just one, then resumed. Faster now. She whispered to the empty air. Whoever wound you, my friend, will return. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. The house seemed to breathe again, uneasy, waiting. Miss Marple glanced at the mantel clock. Its hands crawled toward 11. The hidden one inside the piano moved quicker, set to strike again. At midnight, the next morning came heavy and grey. Fog pressed against the windows like breath. Greybrook Hall looked smaller under it, folded in on itself. Inspector Hart entered the drawing room with a bundle of papers under his arm. He looked tired. Even his boots had lost their shine. Post came from the archives, he said. Found these in the solicitor's box, Sir Henry Willoughby's estate. Miss Marple set her teacup down. Her eyes followed the papers, old, browned, bound by twine. Letters? Some. One's a note. He hesitated before adding, suicide note, at least what's left of it. He laid it flat on the table, half burned, edges torn, the ink faint but legible enough. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice low. Read it aloud, if you please. Hart cleared his throat. To those who loved me, and to one who betrayed me. Music is truth, and truth must end in tempo. When the last beat stops, so shall I. He paused. That's where it ends. The rest is gone. Miss Marple's fingers traced the last line. End in tempo, she repeated softly. Curious phrase for a composer. Hart shrugged. Musicians talk. A man obsessed with rhythm. No, she said quietly. Tempo means more than pace. It means time. She turned toward the piano, still covered by a cloth. His last words were not about music. They were about control. Hart frowned. You think this has something to do with the device you found? Everything, she replied. The piano mechanism wasn't built to haunt. It was built to continue. She lifted the folder of scores again. Sir Henry's final movement, Requiem for a Marriage. At the bottom, faintly written, Keep it in time. Miss Marple looked at Hart. Do you know when he died? The 13th of May, he said. Night of the storm. His wife found him in the study. Said he'd taken poison. And the piano? He shrugged. She had it brought back from his studio after the funeral. She nodded slowly. The mechanism began that night. The first chord, the start of the timer. He built it to strike each year, at the same hour. Hart stared. You're saying the thing's been playing by itself for years? No, Inspector. Not by itself. Someone kept the clock wound. The room went silent. Lady Iris stood at the doorway, pale as frost. Her hands clasped tight around her rosary. She had heard every word. Hart turned. My lady, when was it last tuned? Her voice trembled. Last week. I asked Dr. Venn to check the wiring. He said it was fine. Miss Marple's eyes flicked up sharply. Fine? Yes. Until midnight. She walked to the piano, lifted the cloth, and placed her hand flat against its lid. Warm. Too warm for a cold morning. Inside, faint ticking. Still alive. She whispered almost to herself. Someone kept the clock running, and from somewhere deep within the wood, the clock ticked once clear, deliberate, waiting for its hour. By evening, the fog lifted just enough to see the gardens again. Inspector Hart insisted on another round of questioning. Miss Marple asked instead for dinner exactly as it had been the night of the concert. Every guest, every place, every movement. The servants set the table. Same silver, same wine, same folded napkins. Lady Iris sat at the head, her eyes fixed on nothing. Colonel Graves opposite, restless, tapping his cane against the floor. Dr. Venn's chair remained empty, left untouched, as Miss Marple requested. Clara Wills sat beside it, pale, trembling. Miss Marple stood at the far end, notebook in hand. We will begin, she said calmly. Each of you will take the same seat you held that night, and recall every step, every pause, every sound. They obeyed without protest. Fear had a way of silencing even pride. She nodded to Lady Iris. When the soup was served, at 8 precisely, Iris whispered, and the toast to Sir Henry. past. Miss Marple wrote quickly. And who left the table first? Dr. Venn's absence hung heavy. Colonel Graves answered. He did. Said the candles were smoking. Went to fetch the butler. Miss Marple looked up, but the butler never saw him. Graves frowned. Then he lied. Or he went elsewhere, she said softly. Her gaze shifted to Lady Iris. You rose next, I believe. Iris's lips parted, uncertain. I went to the piano. It began playing. And you stopped it? I tried. Miss Marple turned to Clara. And you? I followed her, Clara whispered. She said it was a fault in the mechanism, but when I looked inside, the timer was still turning. Inspector Hart leaned forward. Timer? The device I showed you, Miss Marple said. It wasn't meant for rhythm. It was a clock. Doctor. Venn had reset it that evening. I found his fingerprints on the casing. Hart scowled. You think he triggered the notes himself? Yes. And Lady Iris saw him do it. Lady Iris looked up sharply. Her hands shook against her napkin. I didn't understand what it meant. Miss Marple's voice stayed even. You understood perfectly. It was blackmail, one final trick to keep you frightened. He made your husband's ghost play for you. The room went still. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the silence. Miss Marple's pen hovered over the page. Every person at this table left the room once. Each gap fits the time it took for the piano to play that cursed melody. Every note was planned a pattern of guilt. Clara's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted toward the piano. A folded sheet peeked from beneath her plate. She reached for it with shaking hands. Miss Marple caught the movement. What is that? Clara opened the page slowly. A single title in bold handwriting. Her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Then she swayed once and collapsed. The sheet fluttered from her hand. The title stared up from the floor. The candlelight flickered over it like breath. The Widow's End. The house slept uneasy. Rain thinned to mist, but thunder still grumbled far away. Greybrook Hall held its breath, waiting. Miss Marple sat by the parlor window, knitting untouched, eyes on the mantel clock. 11:45. 15 minutes left. Inspector Hart dozed in his chair, boots on the rug. Colonel Graves paced, restless, muttering about leaving at dawn. Lady Iris hadn't spoken since dinner, her hands folded tight around a single handkerchief already torn at the corners. Miss Marple's eyes lifted to the ceiling. She heard it first, a soft vibration, faint, uncertain, like a string stretching to tune itself. Then the first note, low, lonely, followed by another, then another. Within seconds, the melody took form. The same cursed rhythm, the requiem. Inspector Hart jerked upright. "Good Lord, not again." Colonel Graves snatched his cane. "It's that blasted machine." Lady Iris whispered. "It can't be." The clock stopped. Miss Marple rose, her voice calm. No, it only paused. They hurried into the great hall. The piano stood in darkness, yet every key moved quick, mechanical, fevered. The bench shook. Hammers slammed the strings like heartbeats gone mad. The sound filled the house wild, uneven, desperate. No one dared approach except her. Miss Marple crossed the floor with steady steps. Each note hit harder, faster, until melody became chaos. "Inspector," she said quietly, "fetch the lamp." He obeyed, hands trembling. The moment the light fell, they saw it, a faint smoke curling up from under the frame. Miss Marple knelt, skirts brushing the floor. "Everyone back." She lifted the bottom panel. Inside the brass timepiece, its wires glowed red. A spark hissed where the copper touched the metal hinge. The piano shuddered, still playing, as though struggling to finish the piece before death. The final bars rolled faster. Keys struck without pause. A burning smell rose, sharp and bitter. Inspector Hart shouted, "Step away, ma'am." Miss Marple didn't move. She reached in, unwrapping the wire from the trigger. Her hand burned. She didn't flinch. "It's not the ghost," she said softly. "It's the fuse." The timer stuttered, clicked, then spun once more. The melody twisted out of rhythm. The strings trembled like screams. Lady Iris pressed both hands to her ears. "Make it stop. Please make it stop." Miss Marple tugged the wire free. The last note cut short. A silence deeper than any music filled the room. Then the faintest crackle. The wire inside sparked again, brighter. Smoke poured from the side of the piano. Miss Marple stepped back. A tiny flame licked through the lower seam. Inspector Hart grabbed a cloth, beat at the smoke. The piano gave one final shudder, a dying gasp of metal and wood. And then, out of the chaos, one sharp scream. Lady Iris. High, piercing, broken. The lights above them flickered once, then died. Darkness swallowed the hall. Only the faint red glow of the burning wire remained, pulsing like a heartbeat. Candlelight flickered against the high walls. Smoke still drifted from the ruined piano, the air thick with the scent of scorched varnish and fear. Inspector Hart stood by the doorway, lantern in hand. Lady Iris trembled near the staircase, her pale face ghost-like in the light. Colonel Graves watched in silence, cane gripped tight against the floor. Miss Marple remained calm. She arranged 3 candles along the carpet, edge of the piano, steady and measured. Their glow reached the cracked keys, each still faintly quivering from the heat. Her voice came soft, low enough that they had to lean closer to hear. "The piano," she began, "was never haunted. It was programmed." The words hung there clear, sharp, undeniable. Hart frowned. "Programmed? You mean someone built that contraption on purpose?" "Yes," she replied. "Sir Henry built it himself before his death, not to frighten to confess." She lifted a scorched page of the old score, pointing to the markings near the top. "Each wrong note," she said, "wasn't an error at all. It was a symbol, a code." Hart shifted uneasily. "A code?" "Yes. Every misplaced note represented a letter. He hid it in the melody." She tapped the candle with a finger. "Listen carefully. The sequence of errors matched the timing of his final movement, the one marked for the living. Each bar held one wrong sound. Each mistake formed part of a message." Colonel Graves scoffed. "Letters in music. Absurd." Miss Marple turned her head slightly. "Not absurd, Colonel. Brilliant. Sir Henry knew no one would ever publish his confession if he wrote it plain, so he wrote it in sound. She moved toward the piano bench and lifted the charred lid. Inside lay fragments of the sheet music, the ink blurred but legible enough. The mechanism triggered every wrong note exactly as he set it, she said. The timer made sure the truth would play again and again until someone finally heard it. Lady Iris's breath came shallow. Her eyes darted toward the door. Miss Marple's gaze found hers. "Your husband left this puzzle behind," she continued, "and someone kept it running year after year." Hart rubbed his forehead. "And what does this message say?" Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave Lady Iris. She spoke quietly, each word falling like a metronome tick. When arranged in order, the letters spell one name. The room stilled. Even the fire seemed to wait. Miss Marple placed the final sheet on the table, the edges blackened from smoke. The first wrong note was A, then G, then A again, followed by D. Lady Iris's lips moved soundlessly, as if repeating them. Her hands clutched her handkerchief tighter until it tore. Miss Marple's voice softened to a whisper, and the last note, the one struck each night at midnight. She turned the candle slightly, the flame reflecting in the widow's eyes. Was I? A pause, a silence that no one dared fill. Miss Marple looked down at the blackened keys. "All together," she said, "they spell a single word." Her voice barely rose above the faint hiss of the dying wire. "Iris." Lady Iris gasped. The candle nearest her guttered out, and the hall went cold. The candles burned low. No one spoke. Only the faint hiss of cooling metal from the ruined piano broke the silence. Lady Iris stood motionless, eyes on the floor. Her face was white, her lips trembling, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "He left me that music," she said quietly. "His final piece, his last words in sound." Inspector Hart stepped forward. "You're admitting he built that infernal machine?" "Yes. He said it would play forever. A monument to our marriage." Her mouth twisted at the word. "But he never told me. He'd hidden something inside it." Miss Marple watched her carefully. "Something you found later?" Lady Iris nodded once. "I tried to finish the requiem after he died. He had left it incomplete. The final movement was missing a bar. Just one." She turned toward the blackened instrument. "When I added it, I didn't know I was setting something off. I thought it was a tribute. But that single bar, it contained a phrase only he and I understood. The very line that started the timer." Hart frowned. "A timer built into a piano? And you never noticed?" "I heard it. I thought it was the metronome. He used it when he wrote. It ticked every night in his study. After he died, it still ticked. I couldn't bear the silence." Miss Marple spoke softly. "Then Dr. Venn came." The widow's eyes darkened. "Yes, he knew. He'd seen the mechanism before Henry's death. He discovered what the clock did, how it struck those wrong notes. He realized there was a message in them." Hart's jaw tightened. "Blackmail." Lady Iris nodded. "He told me if I didn't give him the rights to Henry's works, he'd publish that requiem under his own name. Said no one would believe the truth, that my husband had meant it as a confession." Miss Marple's tone stayed calm. "And Clara?" The widow's breath caught. "She found one of the pages. She came to me that night, terrified. She said the mechanism was dangerous, that it shouldn't run again. She tried to remove the timer." Her voice wavered. "I told her not to touch it. She said it wasn't safe. Then she drank the brandy." "She didn't drink it," Miss Marple said gently. Lady Iris flinched. "No," she whispered. "She didn't." Colonel Graves muttered a curse under his breath. Hart turned away, rubbing the back of his neck. Miss Marple's knitting lay forgotten on the chair beside her. The widow's voice dropped to a whisper. "I never wanted anyone to die. I only wanted the music to stop." Miss Marple looked toward the silent piano. The last candle flame trembled, its light flickering over the keys. Her tone softened further, kind, almost motherly. "My dear," she said, "music can be stopped. Clocks can be unwound. But someone had to keep that metronome turning all these years." Lady Iris looked up slowly. Her eyes glistened, half fear, half memory. Miss Marple leaned forward. And the metronome, my dear, who wound it? Last? The flame beside them flickered once, then went out. The storm had passed, but the house still held its echo. Ash hung in the air, faint as dust on light. Lady Iris stood by the ruined piano. Her shadow stretched across the broken keys. The others kept their distance. Even Inspector Hart had stopped asking questions. Her voice came thin, a whisper pulled through regret. He wanted me to hear it, forever. Miss Marple didn't move. The silence gave room for the truth to breathe. I thought it was love, Iris went on. When he built this piano, he said it would play our song for eternity. But he lied. He built it to punish me. Every night after his death it began again. That same melody, the same reproach. She pressed a hand to her temple as if the sound still lingered. It started quietly at first, a single note, then the full piece. It was his voice, turned into vengeance. He knew I would never leave this house while it played. Hart's voice was low. And Dr. Venn? He discovered the mechanism, said he could silence it for a price. I gave him what he wanted. Money. Manuscripts. He came back for more. Her words slowed, each one heavier than the last. I asked him to stop the machine. He laughed, said it was too clever for me, said my husband had written a trap I'd never escape. She turned toward the inspector, her eyes hollow, so I stopped him instead. I poured the sherry, watched him drink it. I thought it was done. Miss Marple's gaze stayed steady. But it wasn't. No, Lady Iris's voice cracked. That night the piano began again, louder, wilder. It played until dawn. She looked at the broken strings as if expecting them to move. Every key struck like a heartbeat. Every wrong note spelled my name. He wanted me to hear it. Forever. Her strength faltered. She sank into a chair, hands shaking. I tried to burn the scores, but the sound never stopped. He made sure I could never forget what I did. Inspector Hart rubbed his eyes. For once, he had no words. He only muttered, "God help us all." Miss Marple's voice came quiet, certain. Justice doesn't always wait for judges, Inspector. Sometimes it simply plays its tune until someone listens. The hall fell silent. Wind sighed through the cracks of the old windows. The candles burned low, their flames barely alive. Hart reached to close his notebook. Lady Iris lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Will it ever stop?" she whispered. No one answered, not even Miss Marple, for in that silence one sound returned, a single piano key, soft, slow, moving on its own. It pressed down, once held for a breath, then released. The note lingered, faint, unfinished, alive. Morning crept in softly. No thunder, no ticking, only the hush of a house finally emptied of its ghosts. Greybrook Hall felt different now. Still grand, still cold, but quiet like breath held after a long cry. Miss Marple sat by the ruined piano. A single cup of tea steamed beside her. The sunlight touched the broken keys, pale gold against black ash. The room smelled faintly of smoke and polish. A strange peace lingered there. Inspector Hart had left before dawn. Lady Iris was gone too, taken away in silence, her eyes fixed on the floor. Colonel Graves had refused breakfast. He muttered something about never attending another concert again. Now there was only Miss Marple and the morning light. She sipped her tea slowly, her gaze steady on the piano. The instrument looked harmless again, ordinary. But she knew better. Music, she thought, could be cruel when written by a wounded hand. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. Some hearts keep time with regret. She set the cup down and rose, walking toward the instrument. The floor creaked under her steps. The silence inside the hall felt alive, listening. She touched the edge of the lid, scorched, splintered, still warm. Then her eyes caught it, one key near the center, stuck halfway down. The last note, the one that had played after the confession, the one that refused to die. She stood for a moment, simply watching it. It didn't move, didn't tremble, didn't breathe. Her fingers reached out. Old. Steady. She pressed it once. No sound. Only stillness. The silence, deep and whole, seemed to settle into place. The ghosts of melody faded into memory. No more wrong notes. No more hidden messages. Just the quiet truth of a finished story. Miss Marple turned toward the window. Outside, sunlight scattered over wet grass. Birds began to sing, uncertain at first, then sure. She smiled faintly, almost to herself. Some songs end, she murmured, touching the key once more. Only when forgiveness does. The piano remained silent, completely, utterly, finally still. Thank you for joining us tonight, dear listener. Another quiet corner of mysteries, brewed with truth, tea, and time. Tell me which clue gave it away first. Did you suspect the widow or the piano? I always love reading your theories below. If you enjoyed this story, tap like, share it with a fellow mystery lover, and consider joining our cozy community for more tales that whisper after dark. Until next time, may truth cool slower than tea, and may your evening stay just mysterious enough to keep you listening.